Hey Ben, it's great to see you.
Hey, great to see you, Whitney. How's it going?
It's going good. It's we're not too far from one another. I'm up in Knoxville, Tennessee, and it's like a rainy, dreary day. It's the changeover day from like 80s, and now I think next week it's supposed to snow or something.
Yeah, I think we're getting the same here. It started raining early this morning, so we'll get through the Friday. But yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk about forming habits, like replacing habits, thinking about how to like some things like running every day are, looked upon as good habits, but maybe realizing that taking a rest day would be a good habit too for some people because like as we know
Right.
runners can get extreme. But before we get to that, I would love to know your history because you come from a very diverse like career background. I mean, you're a personal trainer, but also an attorney. I mean, how did this all come about?
Yeah, so it's been like kind of a crazy, I don't know, 10 years or so. I actually, after college, I went into hospitality management and worked for Hyatt Hotels for a while, and then ended up then went totally out different direction, went to law school after that.
Yeah, you don't really think of lawyers as being
So
like very
like,
hospitable.
right, yeah, exactly. It doesn't go with the job, right? But it was funny because a lot of stuff in hospitality, in a lot of ways, it translates to just working with people on a daily basis. But I went to law school and was there that was 2008 to 2011. I went to law school down in Miami, Florida. So after that, I came back to Georgia, where I was born and raised, and took the Georgia bar instead of staying down in Florida. Kind of during that whole time in law school, I'd been applying to OCS with the Marine Corps and was not ultimately selected for OCS until after I passed the bar. So I didn't go in as a JAG, but just the way that the programs are set up, being in graduate school and having obligations during the summer and additional years of school, they said you have to you got to get through law school, and then I ultimately passed. Right after I passed the bar was when I got selected for that. So it was dynamic because like I've been doing all of this law stuff, but like just studying. Like I'd been ingrained for 3.5 years, right? Ingrained in law, and then as soon as I essentially became licensed, I went on inactive status with the state bar and pursued my commission in the Marine Corps. So left, I don't know, maybe 5 months after. This was in 2013. So like 5 months after I got notification from the state bar, hey, you're good to go.
Oh my goodness.
Shortly thereafter, yeah, I got selected and then went to Quantico in February 2013. I had spent 4 years in the Marine Corps. At the time, I went into the reserves. So I think that was when I can't remember what it was called, right? But it was budget issues with DOD. So they weren't taking any active duty officers. The only thing that was available was reserve contracts. So I did that and then just volunteered for a bunch of stuff and was able to stay on active duty for a while. And then ultimately came back to Atlanta in 2015, towards the end of 2015, and finished out the remainder of my obligation in the reserves. And kind of during that whole time period, obviously physical fitness was in the background in a large part while I was in law school because I was preparing for this and continually doing physical fitness tests and things like that. But when I was in the Marine Corps, it was just a daily thing that we did. So that was something I became very comfortable with. And then also in a leadership role, whether it was, organizing training plans or mentoring Marines, I think both of those aspects carried over directly into what I'm doing now and really were the catalyst for that happening. So when I got back to Atlanta, it was kind of like, well, what do I do now? Like, I don't want to practice law. I knew that I was going to pursue something fitness related and wanted an aspect of leadership and mentorship because I was drawn to that. I didn't know exactly what that looked like, and but kind of meandered my way into the fitness space. First, actually starting with Orange Theory Fitness and working at a couple of their studios in Atlanta, but not on the coaching side, really more on the sales side and the management side. But it was a great intro into the business and just the fitness industry as a whole and how some things work. And I ultimately left Orange Theory and pursued, opportunities to begin personal training and really small group fitness training to continue that kind of evolution of really personalized one-on-one, coaching. So it's kind of bounced around everywhere, but yeah, it's been great because it's been so many different experiences and all of them have molded ultimately to starting the company that I have now.
Yeah,
like
you could have gone through down so many different paths. Like,
right?
10, 15 years ago, it's like, is he working in a hotel? Is he in Quantico? Is he overseas? Is he in a courthouse somewhere? Is he at the gym? Well, funny enough, like my dad served in the Marine Corps. Every year he trained for the Marine Corps Marathon, and that's how I got into running. Is I would run the last couple miles with him when I was growing up. And I was too young to know, I guess. I don't know. I can't imagine my kids doing this with me. But I thought it was fun to get up early and go run in the cold and the dark with my dad. I didn't know any better. And when I was in high school, he would drive next to me in his Jeep and chant Marine Corps cadences at me. I used to drive a Cadillac. Now I'm running It's so embarrassing, but whatever. It worked.
It worked, right? You're an avid runner now. It's funny because I remember when I was in law school, it was my first semester. There was a career fair, and so they had they had obviously a lot of law firms and stuff there, but they also had different government agencies, and the military was there. So I spoke with the Marine Corps and was totally enamored, right? You're kind of sucked in, and they know they have you. And then I started going out and doing PT with them in the morning before class, and it was the same thing. I mean, it was like we didn't know what we were doing. We were just there to get in shape and learn a little bit about what we hope to do, but running around chanting stuff and falling behind other people's cars and stuff. Yeah. So there's a theme.
There's a theme for sure.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I just started reading Steve Magnus's new book, which is called Do Hard Things. And in the very beginning, he's talking about what toughness is, and that lots of people think, that the military, people think of the military form of toughness. You kind of sink or swim. You just throw people, the Navy SEALs, they just throw them into buds and see how they do. But in reality, that is the opposite of what the military does. They give you all the skills so that you are able to excel in these do or die type situations. And so I don't know, I guess when we start talking about habit forming, you're not going to beat yourself into submission to start these habits. You need to I don't know, you need to toe the soil so that, it's ready to receive the nutrients and start growing, build that foundation so that you have the buy-in and you want to make these habits a part of your life. And so I guess when you think about the military, in planting these lifelong habits on people, it's not because it was necessarily forced upon you. It was, somehow it was woven into the fabric of what you want to eventually do and accomplish.
Yeah, that's a great analogy too, because it is so foundational. And I think it gets to the confusing or one of the challenging aspects of habit formation, right? Is we see tons of stuff about the military and about, arduous training and physical challenges and things like that. And I think that there's a time and place for that, of course, but when you're talking about making, sustainable changes, that you can hang on to that last, it's it shouldn't be painful, and that's not necessarily the formula. Things are going to be challenging for sure, but they have to be doable. And I think a lot of people think, well, I have to set this really high goal or make this first initial habit, right, as challenging as possible because of something they've seen on YouTube or, something their friend told them or something like that. And it's really well, then if you can't do that, then it becomes counterproductive because you're no longer building any positive momentum toward that goal. So to come back to your analogy, right, you're starting really small with something that you can do and you're just planting the seeds. And then over time, right, you're adding to that and the habits eventually, become more robust, but also accumulate. So you're adding to things over time. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges is that starting small and not biting off too much, at the beginning.
I completely agree. I mean, I have a lot of athletes who come to me and they're really anxious to be able to run, a 5K without stopping, or X amount of mileage, or a lot of them become very fixated on what their easy pace is, or they want to start doing speed work. And it's like, we got to meet you where you're at. And if you are going to go from like 0 to 60 right away, it's not going to be sustainable. I mean, let's take out the fact that you'll probably end up getting injured, but you will burn out. Or, I mean,
yeah,
it's just, yes, like it sounds kind of cliche, like breaking it into little steps or into bite-sized chews, but like that is such a good point, because that is really the way that you make it happen. You're not going to be like, okay, well, I'm going to start running 5 mornings a week before work. Let's maybe start with like 1 and see how it goes.
Yeah, totally. There's so many things we could talk about on this vein, because it's like with what you're talking about with not going 100 miles an hour, not running, 5 days a week. I would love to know what your experience has been, because mine has been, it is challenging to not only encourage, but to get buy-in from people on just build your aerobic engine out. Just go really slow, just build volume, and don't even, if somebody's brand new to it, and don't get hung up on like paces and really high intensity, like anaerobic efforts, because it falls apart over time. And if you're not ready for that, then when you do it a lot, you're eventually going to run into some kind of problem, whether it's joint problems or problems, I've had stress fractures and shin splints and plantar fasciitis. And a lot of these things I've had because I have previously done the things that you're talking about, just kind of jump into it. And if you don't know what you're doing necessarily, you're just like, I think it's just supposed to be hard, right? Like, that's what I'm supposed to do. It's like, well, what's the, like, not really. If you're trying to become a better runner, you should be enjoying it. It shouldn't be painful every time. And also your body can't handle being painful every time.
No, and it is like akin to building a house. I mean, if you start doing speed work before your body's right, I mean, that's like trying to put the roof on before, you have like the frame of the house up. Like, you have to build those different systems in your body. And so I just explained to them, and for me personally, this helps too, like, you just need to show up every day and put the work in. It doesn't matter if it's perfect. It doesn't matter if it's pretty. Your body will grow your capillary density. It will, increase your mitochondria. It'll strengthen your bones, your muscles, etc. You just have to show up on the day that you're supposed to run and do the best you can on that given day. Yeah. A problem that a lot of my athletes who are mother runners run into is that they're being pulled into a bunch of different directions, and a lot of things are out of their control, or they feel like it's out of their control. They're working, their kids got sick, they have a bunch of activities after school, and that's difficult. That's really hard, but it's also like you need to come up with a plan A, you need to come up with a plan B. Some things are completely unavoidable, but if it's important to you, you need to state that it's important to you, and then you need to come up with a couple of options throughout the day to make it happen. Because I do believe in inertia or momentum. Like, once that momentum breaks, it does become more difficult to get back on pace.
Yeah. I totally agree. And I think that a big takeaway is like, if people are in that situation, right, and they've come up with a plan A and a plan B, and they got to get 30 minutes in or whatever they're trying to accomplish for a run, if it's consistently not happening, then it's like, hey, that's okay. It's just feedback that you have to switch things up. You have to change your plan because it's not working. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a powerful piece too, because being able to kind of break away and almost from a 30,000 foot view, just look down on it and be like, this is not working, so I need to change it. Well, then you just shift to something else, and maybe you're tweaking, mileage or time or a time of day that you're working. Yeah, a time of day. You've got to explore those other options to make it work. And I think a lot of times people will just think, well, I'll just try harder next week. And it can become really self-defeating, because people get really frustrated. Like, why can't I do this? It's okay. Just change the plan to something that you can do.
How do you figure out, like, how can you be introspective and figure out if it's really life obstacles, or you're just making excuses because you in the end don't want to do it because it feels hard and you're dreading it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of it comes down to like when you're starting the process of whatever you're training for, of really spending extra time in that like assessment phase. And whether it's a self-assessment or you're working with somebody's working with a coach, like understanding what specifically you want to pursue and why specifically you want to pursue it, and then looking at all of the other elements of your life and how those are going to impact your ability to follow through, because that helps you then identify potential problems early on, right? Like if you want to do something physically demanding, or you want to train up to do something physically demanding, but your nutrition and your sleep and your relationship at home is really struggling, like that puts those out there, and so that they're kind of, you're on notice of them at the start. And so coming back to like excuses or not, if it's something that's consistently happening that's kind of related to something that you've identified early on, then it's not like you're coming up with something just random off the top. It's probably a legitimate obstacle that just needs to maybe be reconfigured in order to let you get back to training or whatever you're doing. But I think the interesting thing is like only the person really knows, if they're making excuses or if it's something that legitimately they aren't able to do.
I think if if you're filled with dread when you're thinking about it, and then you find yourself being relieved when like a somewhat viable excuse comes up that for why you can't go running, then that's probably your answer right there.
Yeah, totally. And I think at the end of the day, I think you mentioned this earlier, but like if it is a priority to you, you're going to find a way to get it done in some way, shape, or form. And you might not get all of it done, right? But you'll make the effort to at least, whether if we're talking about running, right, to at least get a little bit in. And if it's consistently not happening, then it's either not a priority or you set the bar too high. Mm-hmm. Like that's another huge possibility. And then it kind of has to come down to like another self-assessment of like, did I pick the right goal, or do I need to downsize? Was I influenced by a video or something that I saw somebody else doing that I thought I needed to do, So
when you meet with a client, your intake process is you look at the goal, you look at the potential obstacles, and you really like fine tune what the why is.
Yeah. So the why is a huge aspect to that. So, like you said, what is the goal? And then kind of go through a process of really digging into, why do you want to run? Because I want to complete a race. Well, why do you want to complete a race? So on and so forth. Like getting a little bit deeper than just the surface level kind of goals that we all just kind of can create. Because when you get deeper into the real reason why somebody's doing it as a coach, it's more powerful, right, for me, because then I can help, facilitate more compliance or understand like certain things that are going to maybe give a little extra inspiration, right, to the person when they need it. But then we're also looking at, like I said, sleep, nutrition, and nothing complex necessarily, but just like, what does your sleep look like? What does your wind down routine look like at night? Do you eat in front of the TV? What does your food generally look like? I want to learn about work and relationships and, hobbies and a number of other like physical things like, previous injuries or anything like that. But, the whole process just for that conversation is probably like an hour. It's a pretty detailed conversation. And the whole point of it is, one, I want to know as much as possible about the person I'm working with, but also it helps me like understand if the goals that were discussed, kind of at the beginning of the conversation, if those are realistic goals for this person with everything else that's on their plate or everything else that they're doing on a day-to-day. And not that I'm then going to say, well, this is not doable, but I can be more realistic with the person in trying to explore potential obstacles before they present themselves, and also can have an idea of things that are going to be challenging and other areas that might need to be really worked on outside of just the fitness side, like to facilitate.
Do you ever help them kind of shape their why or their reasons? Because I know research shows that like extrinsic motivation, like, oh, well, I want my family to think that, I did a good job running a race, or I want to look good in bathing suit season or whatever, doesn't really hold a lot of weight like when the chips are down. And it's more of the, well, I want to be healthy for my family, or I want to be the best I can be, or I want to be proud of myself. Like those are going to be more convincing when you're really hurting at the end of a race, or, when that alarm goes off and your bed is nice and warm and it's dark and cold outside.
Yeah, no, those are great points. It doesn't have to be, but ideally, you're spot on. It's the more intrinsic the goal is, and that it's tied to someone's deeper values or priorities, then, the more alignment there is, the difficult things happen like that. And I think, starting out with that question of why do you want to do X, Y, and Z, you might get an initial response that's more extrinsic, and it might, through some just additional questions, you can start to get a better sense for the deeper reason why. But I think in that same vein, like reward, kind of reward-based systems, right, where you're doing something if you're doing something just to get a grade, or you're doing something just to, finish a race, like just to get an award, like that's great. But then what, are you doing that because somebody else got the same thing and you want to be at the finish line, or do you actually want to, like, what is the end state? What's the purpose of doing it? So a lot of times I'll tell, like, we'll kind of break things down in terms of outcome-based or behavior-based goals. And so, if you're thinking of, if your outcome is to run the New York City Marathon, like, that's great. That's cool. We can delve into why you want to do that, and I want to know that. But then we also want to take into account the behavior-based goals that are going to be required, right, to ultimately get you to your outcome. And that's kind of bringing it full circle to where the other pieces of the puzzle come in, right? Because if we're saying, the behavior-based goals are, you're going to have to eat quality nutrition, you're going to have to train so many days a week, you're going to have do all of these different things. If we could take a habit-based approach through the behavior goals, so let's say we have 3 behavior goals that are needed to get to the outcome of the New York City Marathon, then we break those behavior goals down into like small habits that are required to create the behavior. And so if you're thinking about that in terms of just a training block and building those small habits, one at a time, in my opinion, I think it makes it a lot less tedious just to have the giant outcome goal kind of hanging out in front of you.
So those are the behavior goals are kind of the same thing as like process goals.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It's process based. So I'm going to move more often. I'm going to focus on movement quality. I'm going to focus on nutrition quality, nutrition consistency. I want to get better quality sleep. I want to get more sleep, right? You could think of those as kind of the process goals or behavior goals. And then you're breaking those down into smaller pieces, which ultimately turn into the habits, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think, so I was injured for 2.5 years, and this is my first training cycle back. I'm running CIM in a few weeks, and I've done a lot of things differently. And I have found that having process goals that are just very vague, like 2 heavy lifts a week, if you can, and focusing as much as I can on sleeping well and making sure I'm eating real meals when I come in from my hard workouts, like that, instead of just grabbing a bar and then going straight into mom mode, like that kind of stuff. That's very vague but tangible, just kind of boxes to check, has really helped me stay on track instead of getting too specific, well, you have to lift for a full hour after your track Tuesday workout, and that kind of stuff will box me in and make me feel like I'm failing. But if I just, if you can go down in the basement and do some heavy squats twice a week, good job, Whitney. You know, like,
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I think it highlights too the difference between, everybody's different, right? So breaking the process goals into chunks like that works perfect for you. For some people, maybe it's too vague, right? Maybe they need more structure or detail, and that's okay too. And I think that's highlights the awesome and really important takeaway piece. All this is that it's different for everybody, right? And in order to figure out what works and what doesn't work, you have to try new things, and you have to be willing to kind of, like we were talking about earlier, just take a step back if it's not working, and realize you're not failing. It's not that you're it just has to be re-engineered to make it, easier or manageable enough to do that.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Because I tend to, with running, become kind of perfectionist. I think a lot of people, a lot of runners are that way. They get OCD about the schedule. Taking rest days can be very hard. So for me, making the little stuff not super specific so I don't get crazy about it helps me. But then other things that I have to make sure that I have a rest day scheduled every week. Otherwise I will not rest. And so making sure that I have the schedule and I stick to that is helpful for me. But for other people, that may completely not work for them.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something because you said, I know that I need to schedule a rest day, otherwise I'm not going to do it. And that's highlights your self-awareness, know? And so I think for some people, if they don't have that self-awareness necessarily, that's maybe something that has to be built, a little bit. And I think it's almost counterintuitive, right? From the stuff we were talking about earlier with buds and some of the military stuff, this, in order for the self-awareness to be effective, you have to be able to critique yourself, and without beating yourself up or having all this negative self-talk in your head, you have to be able to critique yourself and say okay, we need something else instead of I need to make it harder. And I think that's it's not a mentality that's necessarily mainstream, right? Because we're focused on the really hard stuff in terms of YouTube videos or a lot of the content that you see out there. And so I think this being self-aware and critiquing, it's just counterintuitive in some instances, especially in an athletic, performance-minded person. They think, they want to just push. They just want to push harder, maybe, instead of assessing and being I need to back off just a little bit.
Yeah, I think holding the main outcome or the ultimate goal out in front, and then thinking about how this decision is going to impact that is helpful. And I realized a lot of my mistakes were rooted in insecurity. I thought, well, if I missed a training day because I felt tired, well, then that's gonna take away from my goal marathon time. And really that was so short-sighted, and it was just based on a lack of confidence in my ability. I think a lot of runners are like that. They're just afraid they're going to lose momentum. They're afraid that, maybe that extra 10 miles could be what puts them over the edge. And really, when you think about that, it's a little nuts.
It is. And we all fall into that trap, right? I mean, anybody that's been running for any length of time can think of, I'm sure, multiple instances where you added just a little bit too much, or you maybe went a little faster on your tempo run because you were feeling good than you needed to, and then something happens, right? At a certain point in the future, and you're oh, crap, that's a good point.
These are all hard lessons that I think almost every runner has had to learn. So what's your take on rewards? I had a whole month and I ran 3 times every week. I'm going to reward myself with a massage or a dinner out. I mean, is that effective or not?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I think it definitely can be. And I think there has to be, I think the rewards can be the most effective when you have intention behind them and some specificity, right? Instead of just rewarding for everything, or, every time I go for a run, I'm going to reward myself somehow. But it can be something, if you're You know, if you're doing something difficult, that can be something to look forward to. It's not going to probably get you to the finish line necessarily, you know, but for anything, right, could be, it's ups and downs, and you've got good days and bad days. So I think anything to give you a positive boost, or just a little bit of decompression, and then you go on and set off about the next piece. I think sometimes where rewards get a little bit difficult is if it's maybe food related.
Yeah.
And just because it's, you know, it's,
Well, kind
I
of
don't
goes
like using, yeah, it goes, I don't like using food necessarily as a, like if you love ice cream, like, then
okay.
eat ice cream, you know, like, but when you save it up for a reward, it turns into like a gallon, it seems like, you know,
Right. Yeah.
it just, so I think things like that, if somebody's actively trying to stop doing something or improve an aspect of their diet, probably they don't want to use that as the reward, because that's going back and forth. But yeah, to treat yourself to do something like that.
If it's something that probably like helps your running, like a massage, or I'm going to treat myself to some Lululemon,
even better
leggings
on
or
those,
something.
because it's,
yeah.
That's so that even better with that, like a new pair of tights or a new pair, like that type of stuff. That's, yeah, I do like that. And that can also kind of get you out of the rut too sometimes.
Yes.
If you're really kind of just fried, it's like, I'll get a new pair of running shoes that'll get me excited.
Yes.
You know, or whatever.
What about like gaming your brain type tricks? Like, I know for me, especially in a racing scenario, but this can be just if the alarm's going off and you're really like doing that internal battle of like, oh, well, I could just sleep a little and then maybe I'll try to go later. Like, I like to think of my future self and like, okay, well, actually, Whitney, you would feel so much better if you got up and got your run out of the way, because then you don't have that run anxiety hanging over you all day, like wondering, okay, when will I get my window to go that doesn't impact other people? Or like when I'm in a race and I don't want to push harder because I'm already super uncomfortable. And I think about like, but what is Whitney at the finish line going to, like, is she going to be proud of herself, or is she going to be disappointed because she didn't try to find the next gear?
That's awesome. Like I think you're super introspective about it, which is probably even more powerful. I think at the most basic form, right? It's just, you have to do something. Like, in order to, if you're struggling, whether it's to get out of bed or to get out the door for the run or whatever, just, you know, you just have to start. You have to do something and just take action in that general direction. Now, if it's even further and you're thinking about the finish line, or you're thinking about all of the previous miles that you've logged right to that day and you just got to keep going, like, that's even better because that's more specific. But if somebody doesn't necessarily have a race on the horizon, right, or something specific that they're training for, just starting to do anything can help, because action creates motivation, not the other way around. So if you're waiting for the motivation to just present itself, it's probably not going to happen, you know?
I totally agree. I mean, I write a lot for my website and I get writer's block. And when it happens, I just like force myself to just get it going. And it's, you know, just start writing, and then eventually you'll break through that block and things will start flowing again. And the same, I think, is true for running. Like, when I have athletes who don't want to run, I'm like, just put your shoes on and go outside and go for a walk. Just say you're going to go for a walk. And there's a very good chance that walk is going to turn into a run. And you just have to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you just have to start moving, because I agree with you. Sometimes it's just like, after you get your shoes on and you get your clothes on and you're out the door, then it's like, well, all right, well, I'm here. Like, but yeah, something very basic. And then I think giving yourself the permission to consider that a success is important too. You know what I mean? So that you're not like, man, you still did a 30-minute walk even though you really didn't feel like doing anything, and then you're beating yourself up after the fact. It's like, no, that's a win because you got out there and did something.
Oh, that's such a good point. Because I know a lot of people, because we do tend to be, you know, very perfectionist with the schedule, or don't view that as a win. And so like having different, like an A, B, C goal, even just for those daily workouts. So we think about it a lot for races, but just even like yeah, okay, I didn't do what was scheduled that day, but I did go out and I did move my body for 30 minutes and I really didn't want to. And so maybe it wasn't the big physical boost, but it was definitely like a huge mental strengthening day for me.
Yeah, and I think I've talked about this a lot with clients in kind of establishing these movement minimums where if you are in a rut, or you find yourself not maybe as excited about training or having difficulty, executing, kind of come up with, what are my daily movement minimums, right? Like, and you're thinking bare minimum, what worst case scenario can I accomplish? And you set the groundwork for that. And then you have to give yourself permission. Okay, that's my movement minimum. As long as I can accomplish that each day, then it's a success. And then maybe, you've got your regular training program, but you got your movement minimums too to keep you sane. And I think that helps a lot too, because you can get a sense of accomplishment even if you didn't do everything that you set out to do.
That's an awesome tip, especially like around the holiday season when people are going to be really busy. And then as we look forward to the new year and lots of people are going to be setting goals, I think, just being really realistic, breaking the goals down, looking at the obstacles, and having like you said, the minimum, and really being happy with that and okay with that, and learning that like those are the building blocks for something bigger and better down the line.
Yeah, and we all have them in some form or fashion. But from my experience, just in utilizing this tool with clients, it's really important to have that self-awareness piece, right? Because if you don't, your chances are you're going to be like, that's way too easy. And then you create, it's not a movement minimum at all. It's like, it's something that's pretty substantial, and then it misses the whole intent of the exercise itself, So it could be really effective and just be self-aware of the limitations.
Yeah, I think a lot of us, like a big obstacle is like we build things up so big and we just make it so daunting, or we just don't have the information. Like a lot of runners, they want to make strength training a habit, but they don't know where to start. And so just, getting to the basics and just, okay, well, I'm going to do 2 different exercises for my legs, some planks, and 2 exercises for my upper body, and like getting started that way. And just, that's like a good like gateway into the world of strength training, sort of, just keeping it super simple. What are some other tools in your toolbox we haven't talked about?
So bright spots is another one. This is kind of in the same vein as like establishing movement minimums, but we'll keep it in the running environment. But if maybe you're training for a race, maybe you've got some kind of nagging injury, maybe you're trying to institute strength training into, your program, kind of looking at your bright spots, maybe on a weekly or a monthly basis, and just picking out, hey, what went really well that's specifically related to something that's difficult, right? And then how can I do more of that? And that bright spot might be like, maybe I finally spent, 3 days doing like 5 minutes of mobility work or something like that. Okay, great. How did you make that happen? What was even beneficial at all? And then how can you do more of it? And you can also look at somebody else that is doing some of these things and try and emulate them, and use that as a bright spot. Or maybe a time in the past when you were training for something and things were going really well, like that entire thing, look at that as a bright spot, and then try and dissect it to figure out what exactly was making it work. And again, how can you do more of it? And it sounds kind of silly, or maybe like wave tops, but if you know what I mean? When somebody when you specifically annotate these things, over and over and over again, over a period of a few weeks, like, you're going to see trends. And I think we are naturally kind of negative sometimes in our narratives.
Because as you're saying bright spots, I'm like thinking about my bright spots, and I'm like, but I find a lot of dark spots hidden on those bright spots.
Oh, that's such a great point. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Because I think that's important. Like, it's important for people to hear that, because we all do that. And the danger of that is then we miss those bright spots, right? We forget about them. And so if we start logging them and we actually look at them and, take 10 minutes to do it, you see those trends and they're stacking up and they're kind of like undeniable, because you've written them down, you've really thought about them. And, and I think it can also help just give better perspective to some of the dark spots that we're all trying to kind of put out of our head or take in context, really.
Oh my gosh. So I am going to start a journal with that when we're done here. That's such a good point.
Oh, yeah.
Because like in my Strava, I leave little notes and they're always negative though. It's like, and I keep most of the notes private to myself, but like, it's so hard to give yourself kudos because like, you go out for a run and it's like almost always something could have been done better or felt better or whatever. And so I just think that probably does something. I don't know, like helps with the neuroplasticity of your brain to really start like, implementing that into your thinking that like, hey, I am doing things right. And I really should be like giving myself a pat on the back of like, hey, good job. You did whatever small or big thing.
I think that's an awesome idea. Yeah,
well, it was yours,
really
so good job.
Well, take it, no pun intended, but take it and run with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think that's spot on. And we've heard about self-fulfilling prophecies, right? Like where you kind of create your own, and in a lot of ways we do. We create our own future, our own destiny, and what we tell ourselves on a daily basis. And it can be positive or it can hold us back.
Yeah, that's something that I realized now as I'm getting close to my race that I need to, like the next 3 weeks, I'm just really focusing on my mental game because I realize that that's like, unfortunately, the track that I'm heading on and I'm trying to change directions. Okay, so bright spots and making sure you write those down. Anything else that we didn't talk about?
I think, just generally speaking, if you're trying to change something, lifestyle, nutrition, fitness, if you're trying to get started running, pursuing a race, break things down as small as possible and think about what you can do on your worst day, because that's kind of insulating you, right, from having off days or from having days where you're like, I can't do that, I'm not gonna do anything.
Right.
So I can't reiterate this enough, just of like pick small habits, pick things that are doable that that you can do. There's nothing wrong with that, because if you accumulate 50 of those over a year, all small habits that that you can do, but you're not doing them right now, that's a huge net positive, right? Instead of picking things that are really challenging, maybe they pay off more, right, in the short term, but over a year, like how many of those really challenging endeavors are you going to flawlessly, crush? You're comparing the net positive or the net growth really in each situation over a year. It's like, I think you're going to be in a better position by picking small pieces and building on them than picking really challenging things just right off the bat. You can get to challenging things, that'll happen. You do enough easy things, right? And each time it gets a little bit more complex. So the difficulty will be there, but you'll be better set up for success to execute and to do it.
I love,
Because you've had so many reps.
That's such a great point to because I think that also negates excuses. Like if you have your bare minimum, what can I do on my worst day? Then you don't, because you're right. Like so many people think, well, I can't go out and do my 4-mile run. So what's the use? I'm not going to do anything. But like, if your goal is just go outside for 10 minutes like that, then that keeps the momentum going. That still makes you feel accomplished, and that's still working towards your ultimate goal. So that's great advice. I've learned so much from you. This has been really eye-opening.
Oh yeah, no, this has been a great conversation. So thanks for the back and forth.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm so glad we finally got to chat, because I had to, due to illness in our house, I had to keep rescheduling. Yeah. So thanks for being so flexible.
No, my pleasure. Yeah, I enjoyed it. This was great.
Thank you.
You bet.